Welcome to our newest episode of From Here to There, episode number 8. Today, we wanted to touch on a few real estate-centered topics that many of our listeners have asked questions about. I know when you're thinking of making this kind of move, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out what to do and with all of your things and how to get started. So even if you have some kind of idea of where you want to move, it can still be overwhelming to know where to start. I can tell you so many stories about walking into a client's house and seeing someone with all of the dishes out of all of their kitchen cabinets or closets just in disarray on the floor. And really, people getting overwhelmed with paper is really common as well, thinking that they have hours worth of shredding and papers to get through and feeling like it's just a task that they're never going to be able to master. But in the center of all of this mess is a person trying to live their daily life and keep their doctor's appointments and trying to not just toss in the towel and give up and think that it's easier to do nothing at all. It's really hard to kind of know what items you should sell, what should be donated, if you even have enough for an estate sale, and then also getting a good idea of what to take with you into your next place. But really, in order to know which items you're going to move with you, you have to know where you're moving. And that's why our first several episodes kind of went through a discussion of different options on where to move and things that you might possibly consider if you haven't already. If you've chosen to move into an apartment or a retirement community or an assisted living, they tend to give you a floor plan on paper. Those aren't always exactly the apartment you'll be moving into, but they can give you some basic dimensions. If you're moving into another house, a single family home, or something maybe a little bit more unique, you might actually have to try and take measurements and sketch those out on paper to give you an idea of the space that you'll be working with. Really, that kind of gives us some leeway to talk about what we're going to talk about today with today's guest. She's been an expert to help a lot of our past clients kind of work through what to bring and what to do with everything else. And we hope that you get a lot out of her interview. I think that you'll learn something and hopefully be able to put some more pieces together for your next move. Thank you. Hi, and today we are going to sit down with Karen Barlow. We wanted to do this today because whenever we sit down with an individual or a couple that has decided where they're going to move and they kind of have a timeline on where they want to move, they start to kind of visualize what they want to take with them and what they're going to leave behind. And at that point is really when we tend to bring in the experts. And today we have Karen Barlow with Changing Seasons. Karen used to work in the San Antonio market, but has somewhat recently relocated to the Abilene market. But we feel that really her insight and the advice that she has for all of our listeners is really universally applicable no matter where you are. So welcome, Karen. We just wanted to first start with you maybe telling us a little bit about your background and what role you play in the moves of the individuals you work with a lot.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much for including me today. Just so glad to see you again. We are actually going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is how to make a home a home. When I was a little girl, even, I would drag my furniture around my room to make changes, and I had no idea that, when I would grow up, that would be something that I would do and still enjoy so much. So I really very passionate about creating home, whether it's in your home where you are now or where you're moving to a new space. And so becoming a move manager was a very natural flow, although when that happened to me, I also had never heard of that service before. My career prior to 2010 involved marketing and interior design. And in 2010, I felt a real strong call to help older adults when they are in this transition time of needing to move from a house often that they have been in for a very long period of time.
Right.
to moving to a much smaller space and then being able to set that up as home again. I Like I said, I was an interior designer, so I had the skills. I have very strong organizational skills, so it was a really good fit. But I had to learn exactly what a move manager does and how to put those skills into practice. I am a member of the National Association of Senior Move Managers. So there is a group, an international group of people who do exactly what I do all over the world. They are mainly in the Northeast and California and Florida. That
Mm-hmm.
makes sense because many people are retiring in those areas, and they've been there for a long time that when you hire a mover, you always hire a move manager with it. It is not as commonly known in Texas. There's only about 35 or 40 members of this national association. But if you choose a move manager, having someone who has that membership tells you that they have the experience to become a member, they are insured, which is important,
Right.
that they have a lot of training, and they really know what they're doing. So it's not just a box
And
you check. It is
And I've kind of directed people that way too, whenever they, say, is there someone that does similar to what Karen does in Florida or, something like that. So that's kind of my first source as well, just making sure that they've had that extra training instead of just saying that they specialize in something that they don't have any background or,
that's all
training.
advice. And if you want to pass that on, going to the National Association of Senior Managers website it has a map of the U.S. and you can definitely look and find members in all those different states.
Yeah, what a great resource.
It absolutely is. There's also articles too about moving when you are a senior or if you're wanting to look for your parent. There's a lot of good information on the website.
Okay.
I'm also a certified aging in place specialist.
Okay.
And what that means is if you are not going to move, decided that this home is the one that you want to stay in for as long as possible, I have the ability to go in and do an assessment of the home and be able to make changes to make it safer. So that service is not something that I've done a lot of,
Okay.
but that that education has made me a better mood manager because
Yeah, and that's really interesting. That's not really where you and I necessarily work together, but we've thought about maybe having a whole different episode even to kind of talk about something like that. Maybe even I know some people that can actually do some changes to a house, whether that's building a ramp or installing grab bars, that kind of thing. So that might be a great time. We'd like to have you back to say a little bit about that as well. So
very passionate about that, even if you were saying building a new home. I know some older adults decide when they want to downsize, they want to build a garden home. And there are some really important things that you can incorporate in the design phase that are not necessarily a lot more expensive,
right.
but it's part of the design. It also doesn't stick out. There's very attractive things that you use in functional design, and it just makes your home so much more comfortable
Yeah,
and
that's
easier to stay there over a long period of time.
right. And I'm sure it's easier to do it from the beginning rather than trying to retro later.
And a lot less expensive. Yes.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Well, I'm sure just like you, whenever you go into somebody's house for the first time, you don't really know what you're walking into. Sometimes people are really nice and have a plan and papers and everything exactly what they're going to do. And then sometimes people more often than not say, I have no idea what I'm doing and I have no idea where to start. And I think that that's where a lot of people start to second guess their idea of moving. I think they start to think sometimes it's easier to do nothing than it is to face all of this. And that's where I have heard time and time again that having a move manager can be just a breath of fresh air from somebody that does this, multiple times a month instead of once in a lifetime. And so whenever your client, I'm imagine that most of the time they kind of know a floor plan of where they're moving into, but like you said in the beginning, it tends to be a very different square footage from what they're coming from. And so really, what are your first steps with them?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about what is a senior move manager.
Okay.
Most people do not know what that service is, and I served in San Antonio almost 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
and in that time frame, it didn't get a lot better as far as people being able to recognize what that service provided.
Right.
But it is growing exponentially all over the country as far as the need for it. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what a move manager does.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so to me, it is the absolute difference between having a really good, smooth transition. I mean, we know how hard moving is, no matter. But if you have the preparation and planning the way that you need to, it does not have to be the nightmare that most of the time we hear about.
Right.
I have moved 14 times in my adult life.
Mm-hmm.
I have a military spouse, and until I, got into this line of work, I had no idea that moving doesn't have to be that that stressful.
Traumatic. Yeah.
Right. So, but a move manager in general provides these services. First of all, we do all the planning and the preparing for the move. So we are the people that oversee all the details. We work with the client to find out exactly what they do and tailor those services to them. We also coordinate all of the services such as the mover. And if you're moving into a senior community, we coordinate with the community, setting up all those times, making sure the elevator's available, and a lot of details that unless you move often, you probably wouldn't think about.
Right.
So we do that. And we develop floor plans, which not every move manager uses floor plans the way that I do, but for me, they were absolutely the cornerstone tool to being able to know so many things. Once you had your floor plan drawn with the furniture, you know exactly what's going to fit and what's
Mm-hmm.
not going to fit.
Right.
Furniture. And then you also have an idea, and I was very detailed. I measured all the cabinets and things like that. So we knew exactly the space that our clients had. So when we were helping them downsize their kitchen, we
Mm-hmm.
would downsize to the space that they were moving into. So the floor plan is very critical. Also, the floor plan that you get from the community often is not, it's just a basic floor plan, and it may or
Right.
may not be correct.
Yes, and window placement, I've seen that shift and
Outs in the wall, where the air conditioner is, where the light switches are, all of those sorts of things really matter when you're trying to place furniture. So the floor plan is huge. And then the third thing we do is we help them sort. We help them organize and declutter. So room by room, closet by closet, we are the people that help you go through those things. And we can do it in a very efficient time manner. And since we know the space you're going into, it just makes it a lot easier. So what is often the most overwhelming part of this, move managers make a huge difference in being able to get that done.
yes.
And we schedule and oversee the movers. And then one of the biggest questions when I meet with people for the first time is, okay, so I'm moving to 1,200 square feet, and my home right now is 2,800 square feet. What do I do with all of the things that are left over?
Yes.
So we can talk about some options there, but we coordinate all of that.
Mm-hmm.
In San Antonio, I used an online auction service and provided that for my clients because we regularly sold 95 to 100% of items. And so it just took care of the problem and cleared the home
Right.
so that you can go in and help them get it on the market and
right.
get it done.
And
And
I
then
think, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, that's where everyone gets hung up, is not so much what I'm taking with me or where I'm going. I've made that decision, but what about all the other things? And that's where the roadblock happens. And that's where the overwhelmed and the laying in bed and not knowing what to do at night kind of steps in. So,
very stressful,
right.
so if you can have someone take care of that part of it for you, it makes all the difference in the world.
Right.
And then the last thing that we provide, which to me, if I had someone do this for me, it would have been such a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when we're overseeing on move day, we were doing the packing, we oversaw the mover, and then we received all the things and completely unpacked instead of things.
Yes.
When our clients walked in at the end of the day, they were walking into a home that was completely set up and ready to live in, toothbrushes in the bathroom, kitchen all set up, ready for coffee the next day. And they did not have that burden or stress of unpacking boxes and dealing with all of that. So to me, that alone is worth looking for a move manager to help. But all of these things lift that burden off of the client's shoulders and onto ours.
And I don't know if you remember or if you listened to it, but we had, I don't know if you remember Dawn and Mary, but they've been on our show as well. And they talked about that they just kind of took off. I think they went and stayed at the Riverwalk or something. And then it came back and it was like elves had come in and just put everything away. And that's unlike any move that I can imagine any one of our listeners having ever gone through, unless they've used a move manager. I mean, it's just unheard of. That's the whole second half of the trauma, right? Is unpacking. So
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Move managers usually have a move partner, so that this mover, and the mover is used to working with us because we ask for a few different things than a normal move would be. And that's a difficult part of moving too. It's like, who do you call? Are they going to show up on time? Which a lot of times they don't. And are they going to take care of my belongings? And so when
right.
you work with a move manager who has a move partner, again, that's questions and stress that are taken away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So whenever you actually sit down and walk in that door to do your first consultation with somebody, so I know you kind of went through what a move manager does, and I'm sure that's the process you go through, but are there regular things that you do in the very beginning, or are there certain conversations that you have to have along the way?
Well, I mean, the very first thing is to find out, what is that person looking for? What are they needing? Some people know that they're moving to a senior community. They already have the floor plan. They've already started putting tape on their items to see if they would fit. And then some people, like this gentleman, just the sweetest man, comes to mind. He became very dear to us because he had been sitting in his very nice home for a year, stuck. He said, there's just so much here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do. I don't know who to call. And his wife had passed 4 years before, and he was in his early 70s, so he was, not an older person,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak, still very active and in good health. But it was just so overwhelming for him. And so, we walked. He did not know where he was going to be. He knew the town, but he was just looking for an apartment. But he had not found that yet. So we just tried to make some assumptions on the general size of space that he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And he had so much downsizing that we needed to do that. By the time we got finished with that, he had found what he was doing.
Right.
We just kind of, talked through what do you need to happen between now and the time that you want to move.
Right.
And we talked about those services, and then we began to work with him. And it was just very successful. He said, I probably would never have left.
Yeah.
Had not found the support that y'all
And And that's maybe interesting. Another question too is I think that sometimes people think, when do I reach out? Is there a right time or a wrong time to reach out to a move manager? What if I don't know exactly where I'm going? I just know that a move's coming down the line. I mean, is it okay to call you if they're pretty far out from?
Yes, because not everyone uh, would be needing all the services that a move manager provides. I think it's a very good package to have, but some people have family that they would want to work through things with. Um, but it's never too soon to just talk to someone and get an idea of a plan. Um, I know one of the things you wanted me to talk about is if let's just say it's out there that you're going to move sometime in the next couple of years, maybe. But what would you be able to do now?
Right.
And I would just really, really encourage people to start that downsizing. And I can just hear the groans, and I just moved myself, so I do really know what that feels like. But what makes this so much easier
Mm-hmm.
is if you take this off in bite-sized pieces,
Right.
so that you're not trying to go through the whole sewing room. You're going through these 3 drawers,
Right.
and then the next day or the next week, you'll go through the closet or the
Mm-hmm.
file. Even if it's just one drawer at a time, that's manageable, and that feels like you're making progress.
Mm-hmm.
And if you did that every week for 6 months, that's a lot.
Right.
You would have gotten through, and you're so much more ready when you finally say, "We found the place, and we're ready to go."
So it's probably best to not necessarily start with the hardest room or the hardest obstacle first. Yeah. And what if somebody are you able to work with somebody who doesn't have a lot of time? Like maybe there's been a hospitalization or something, and it's become really evident that we need to move now. I mean, is that reasonable to say I only have a few weeks, or, I mean, have you had to work with something like
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. And of course, the longer the time frame, the lower the, the stress level for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We have moved people inside of a week before, which was really, really difficult to do a good job that way,
Right.
because so many things we're trying to do for them. But sometimes things just happen. And later on, I think one of the main things I try to say to people that I'm very passionate about is just don't wait.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go ahead and make these decisions, if you know that you're not going to stay where you are, and that move, the sooner you do it, the better.
Right.
Because, I have 2 clients that I kind of think uh, in the in the back of my mind. One lady who waited so long that by the time that we got in to help her, she was no longer able to make her own decisions anymore. She wasn't able to sort through her own things. And and then her husband passed within 6 weeks after them getting situated.
Mm-hmm.
There's another couple who was probably their same age, early 80s, but they looked at their family. They were a blended family, and they just felt like that it was not going to be beneficial for their kids to have to deal with all of their things. So they were still very active in the community, still very good health.
Right.
But they said, we want to make this decision and we don't want it to be put off onto our children. And so it was, it was hard.
Right.
But I actually heard from that client a couple weeks ago who called me on the 3rd anniversary of them moving. And she said, I just have to say it was such the right thing for us to do. We are so glad. And if we had known it would be the way that it was, we probably would have done it sooner.
Well,
Those are 2 different.
yeah, and I think what you're saying is so true. And, not to kind of, go down a negative path, but when I am talking to people, I say, I'm not here to pressure you to do this now. It's just, I've seen a tale of two moves, right? And, and also, I just think it's such a gift. It's part of your legacy to leave behind to say, I've gone through everything, and the things that I still have are so important to me that, that was just costume jewelry and I got rid of that at an estate sale. But this is grandmother's ring, those kinds of things. And yeah, and when I see people, I also work with people who maybe parents have already passed and now they're working to go ahead and try and clear out mom or dad's house, and they intend on going through it drawer by drawer and room by room, but eventually it just all has to be boxed up and thrown out, or whatever that is, because they want to do the right thing, but they just simply don't have the time. They have to get back to their lives and everything. So I think it is just such a gift.
Well, and I actually have, I haven't mentioned this to you, but I certainly have an additional perspective because um, we moved a couple of years ago for my husband's position. Um, but what we didn't expect was for my father to become very ill right away, and he passed within months, and he was not ready. And so now I have been through this process not only with many, many clients, but for myself and my family. And I did not have family support to do that. So it was me and one couple. And my parents had been in their home for 42 years. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Right.
Because
Yes.
you have not only the physical burden, but you have the emotion as well. And so move managers can provide a big support in that too. I'm glad you brought that up. If your parents have already passed and you are now in that situation, what could take the family a long period of time,
Right.
we can help support with that as well. So when you have a move manager involved in that downsizing, what can take you 6 months will take us 6 months or less.
Right.
Because we just have a process of how we do that. We don't pressure, but we know how to be efficient with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the same thing that I say too, is that, selling a house, a lot of my clients being in San Antonio, they are military a lot of times and they have made a lot of moves, but this is just such a different move, just such a different move. And that's where, having experts that make this kind of move weekly, monthly, whatever that is, absolutely is still much more experience even than someone like yourself that's moved 14 times. If we have a client that's moved 14 times, this is just infinitely different. So
Yes, and I keyed on that also in some of the notes we talked about, in that you may have moved, like really one of the closest people that we've helped was a military chaplain, and
mm-hmm.
he had only been in his home for 12 years. But yet it took us months to help them, and they didn't have an overabundance of things.
Right.
But it just took them longer to go through things, and they realized it. And so it was the preparation for their move was so less stressed that
mm-hmm.
because we had the time. We were actually going to be moving them into a new community. So we had much longer than normal to prepare for that. And what was such a blessing in that situation was that the wife actually got very ill just prior to the move.
Mm-hmm.
And they had been trying to handle that on their own with that mover, or had not done that preparation beforehand. It just would have been a disaster. But what happened was it was one of the happiest days they'd had, because they were in a new home. I had done some interior design for them, so it was homey, but it was fresh, and
Right.
he was healing, and it was just such a blessing that we to
Yeah.
start.
And I mean, I can see that now. There's a couple that I've been visiting with recently, and they are on a wait list for a place that tends to have a year or so before there's an opening. But I think that they feel paralyzed because they said, well, we're on the wait list for two different apartments, and whichever one comes open is the one we'll take. So we can't really start downsizing and sorting until we know which one we're getting. But I think that that's kind of where they have to go back to what you were saying, which is drawers are still drawers and closets are still closets. It doesn't matter if you get the 2 bedroom or the 1 bedroom with a study.
Right. And I've had people tell me, we're not moving for 4 or 5 months. Why do we need to talk to you? And there's a lot of reasons because, like
Yeah.
I said, the longer your time period for preparation, the less stressed you're going to be. And if that couple would choose the smaller floor plan and just say we're going in there and work toward that, and then if they get a bigger one, then that's not hard to adjust. And
Right.
also, what happens a lot of times is when the people are on that wait list, many people are not ready.
Right.
They just put themselves on the wait list just so that they'll have a spot. So they go down that list, quite a few, and you may not be a year. It may be 6 months or 4 months.
Yes.
And if you're not ready to go, then you will miss the opportunity of that apartment. And if that floor plan is really important to you, which a lot of times it is to people, then you're going to miss it. So being ready may get you what you really want.
Right. And I've seen too where most of the time, if there's a wait list, they want you to take financial possession quick. I mean, maybe 30 days, maybe, but sometimes it's quicker than that. And so if you haven't started down this path, and at least these are the service providers that I'm going to be working with, I don't have to go through what do you do and what does it cost and all. They've already have those answers. They can just say go. It's much better than saying, what do you mean I have to start paying by the end of the month? I can't be ready that quick. So yeah, that's what I've seen as well. So it sounds like kind of what you're saying, though, is that maybe one of the most common threads in the stress level of the move is having that kind of jump start and having that extra time to be able to prepare rather than, I've talked a few times to listeners about being proactive rather than reactive, right? And that sounds like kind of what you're talking about is being proactive, even though you're not moving next week or next month, instead of reacting to the apartment being open, reacting to a sudden change in health, or reacting to a sudden realization that the house isn't working after you've spent $30,000 in repairs in the past 6 months, or
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Okay. So I think just to kind of, talk about the elephant in the room a little bit, sometimes people say, well, I don't know, do I really want a move manager? Can't I just call? I used Atlas or whatever last time for my move. Can't I just do that? I'm sure that they can pack me too. So just to kind of talk through what you've already said, really, it's that hands-on, it's that picking the cream of the crop really to take with you to your new place. And then I've never had a different type of moving service ever unpack me. And like you were saying with the toothbrushes and the even hanging curtains, and I've even seen move managers have to go buy bar stools because we never had bar stools before, and this new place needs bar stools and that kind of thing. And surely a giant moving company isn't going to have the time or resources, nor would you maybe want them to be the ones picking your bar stools and hanging your curtains.
Right, absolutely. Well, I've done a lot of those things for clients as an interior designer. But the difference really between using a move manager and a mover that you trust, that you've
Right.
had, that's a big deal, is that the move manager is managing the move.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those decisions and all of those details that are going to make this move work for you, and hopefully keep your items safe, and then be able to reestablish a very comfortable and active and safe home. is going to be up to the client. The mover, all they're going to do is pack what you tell them to pack, put it in the truck, and take it over to the apartment and unload it.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the other decisions that need to be made about how much is going to go with you, where are those things going to go, the overseeing of the day of the movie. That's really one of the hardest
Right.
things. Is we're there, we're overseeing the loading of that truck. Some movers are more careful than others, and then they have to unload, and they have to take it into the space, and then it needs to be put where it needs to be put so that you don't have to try to move that heavy stuff again. And then all of the unpacking and then all of that material, where that goes, that is a lot of physical labor. And you made a very good point that you may have moved a lot of times in your life. If you are a senior adult, this is a move like you've never made.
Right.
Most of the time, you are trying to cope with the fact that you're leaving a home that you've been in for a long time. You're leaving neighbors. You're leaving maybe your church. And then you're also having to move to a smaller space,
Right.
which is not always a negative thing.
Right.
Many of us live in just certain parts of our home, so going to a 1,200 square foot apartment is not really that difficult, but it's just the idea of that is different. And then you're going to a different lifestyle if you're
Yes.
going to live in a senior community. And all those things can be very, very positive, but they're big changes.
Yes.
And most people have never used a senior move manager before, so it's kind of hard to know how supportive this is going to be. But just thinking that you have an expert in all of these details we've talked about to help you and be in charge, so you're not laying awake thinking about those things tonight.
Yes.
And just to make sure that it happens to the best of everyone's ability is huge.
And I've seen, so I had a couple, I mean, one of the nicest couples I've ever worked with from the real estate standpoint, move into a community, a retirement independent living community. The community gave them a couple of names and they went with the least expensive, which I will say that mover did know the community. I mean, they knew about the elevator procedures and days of moving and size of apartments. But when I went to go visit this sweet couple, they were still up to their eyeballs in boxes. The reason I had come was because he had electronically signed documents in the past, and he said, I just can't get my computer to work. Can you just come? And I did. And I realized the reason he knew the reason his computer wasn't working, but they had lost the power cord for his desktop computer. And he said, I don't even know, do I go to radio? I don't even know, can you buy a new, those kinds of things. And I know you guys will set up the little office space if they have that. And then he said, and also I can't quite decide what to do because they had two big dressers that had mirrors over the top. One mirror had made them move, but was attached to the wrong dresser. And the other mirror was simply missing. And he'd moved a couple of weeks before this. And then there was something else, but it had to do with cords, and that whole box, I guess, was missing of the cords. And he has a wife going through chemotherapy. He's pretty much a caregiver for her on those days that she has chemotherapy, and trying to look through all this. I said, you really need to go downstairs to the community and just let them come upstairs and look at your apartment, because I know you are not a complainer. You're very positive. He said, I'll get all this taken care of very soon. But there is a difference. There's a price difference for a reason, but I can say that the mental health of that couple was so different than, let's say, Don and Mary that used a move manager, right? I mean, just so incredibly different. And the other thing, this is what I was going to say, was he asked me, he said, are you going back to the house, his old house? And I said, I am. And it was right before the estate sale was going to take place. And he said, can you bring these 2 boxes. They weren't heavy, but they were 2 boxes. Can you bring these back? Because I brought way too much. So now he's using anyone he can and in his car trying to drive boxes back because he didn't really think through it. So, that's just kind of my personal perception of this disaster that was happening.
Unfortunately, we have seen that numerous times. That has happened to us as managers, and so we would change our processes when things like that would happen. In the very beginning, we just let our movers do actual packing, just because that was not experience I had, and I just felt like that would be better to do that. But with so many things like you're talking about that we were not in control of, and yet when we're trying to set things up, those things are missing. Um, it was just very, very stressful for us. So we started doing the packing as well and became incredibly more efficient.
Right.
And much fewer of those things happen. I mean, in a move, when you're moving things, some of that's going to happen. There's just a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of physical things that are being taken from one place to the other. And sometimes they do get misplaced. But we had a process for a lot of that. And movers are trying to get the most moves done that they can in a day.
Right.
And that's just what they do. So being able to provide the oversight protects your valuables, protects your furniture to the best we can. There's things that we learned about those dresser mirrors that we required our movers to do so that they didn't get left behind and they didn't break on the way over there, even though we were often just moving 10 to 20 miles. It wasn't very far. It was within the city limits. But a lot can happen in that time space. And, that's another thing, having a designated mover that works with that move manager, you can control more of those things. And that feels better because, one of the worst things I hated about when we finished a job is if I broke their coffee cup, I felt bad about that. I didn't want to have to say, this got broken under our watch. And yet some of that's going to happen. But we often went moves that had no breakage at all. And so your move manager is just going to have a lot more in place and the oversight to just try to prevent a lot of those things. And it really does affect people's attitude when they get to a place and they have to completely set their own apartments up. They're tired and stressed from the preparation, and then they get there and now they have a whole nother 1,200 square feet or less to set up. And if I had let's say 1,000 square feet, my team was 4 or 5 people, and that would take us the better part of the afternoon to break down all the boxes, take everything out, and then set up the apartment. So that's 15 to 20 man hours of people who do this all the time.
And that's their job. That's what they're doing the whole time. Your clients, when they're trying to unpack themselves, they also need to know where the mailboxes are, and they're trying to learn where they go get lunch, or what they're supposed to do if they want to participate in an activity, which is just off your, you can't even think about doing something like that if you're trying to live in boxes. And so I've actually talked to communities before when they ask questions about people that we refer to and everything. And I'll just say, but you're going to end up with someone that is ready to adjust to this new lifestyle right away within the first couple of days, instead of spending the next few weeks. I've even seen months where somebody is still trying to unpack, still trying to drive stuff back to the other house and drive more stuff back to this. I mean, there's so many stories, and I'm sure you've seen the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the marketing managers, the moving coordinators for the communities always were happy when a manager was on the job, because they know that the move is going to go smoother, most likely. and that their client is going to be much more quickly adjusted to
Right.
life there. And that makes everyone happy. You had talked to me earlier about, what were some common threads on successful moves
Mm-hmm.
and unsuccessful moves. And I think we've covered, quite a few. Um, when I think about successful moves, first of all, the client is the one who decided that they wanted to move. They
Mm-hmm.
did not wait till circumstances required that. So they just felt better about, this is my decision, and this is the best what I think that I want to do right now. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that most people make, is that they wait too long.
Right.
So then usually something will happen and they have to move quickly. And we've already talked about with the short time frame, that makes everything a lot harder.
And that kind of goes back to the wait list too. You take what's available. I mean, you just have to take what apartment's available if you get forced into a quick move.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And most of the time those will be smaller.
Yes.
You would want, because those don't go nearly as fast. Successful people, when they are moving, they've used a floor plan, and they've done some planning, and they've done some thinking through of what they want to take. And then again, the attitude of, this is not my last move, but this is the move for this season of my life.
Right.
The great thing about going through a house that you have been through living in for 30 or 40 years is that once you do that, you don't have to do that ever again.
Right.
And I've told many clients like that. It's just like, just hang in there, because once this difficult part is over and you get into that beautiful new space, all this is taken care of.
Yes.
You do not ever have to worry about that again. Your kids do not have to worry about it. You're living in a space that is comfortable, and you have everything that you need. And so just having that good attitude about, what is next.
Mm-hmm.
For people who had unsuccessful moves, they had a very negative attitude toward the move. They were not happy. They were really mourning the fact that they were having to leave their home. Or they're having to move in a crisis, or they're being forced to move by family, usually health problems. And nobody gets to choose very well when
right.
a crisis is happening. They were often very unprepared, or they tried to do too much themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people hire me, say, just for move day.
Right.
They thought, my kids are going to pack me up. I got my mover. I just want you to be there so that nothing really bad happens. Well, that was really difficult for me to do a good job, because I didn't have the time or the experience with their things.
Right.
But anyway, it usually didn't end up very well, because there was not that prior planning, and you're having to make those decisions when there.
And I've seen that because adult children have the best of intentions to help pack, and they know mom or dad really well, and they know what's important, and they have energy, and they're ready to do it, but they don't have the number of moves under their belt as a move manager does. And so I've had someone who said, my kids really want to help. Can you give them a task to do? But it is not going to include entirely packing me. And so sometimes it is okay, I want you to help me narrow down my books, right? Adult child, you can help me narrow down my books, or you can help me sort through these photographs and distribute them to the family. So something like that can be a large task. I've seen people really struggle with narrowing down photos and really struggle with narrowing down books. So maybe an adult child needs a specific task that would be very helpful. But as far as selecting how much furniture is going to go and the actual packing in a logical way that you can unpack it successfully for them as well, I think is really left best to the experts. And I've seen the same thing you have, the best of intentioned children, and then the move date's tomorrow and only a quarter of the house is packed.
So what do you do when you get there and the mover's ready to load? And the whole schedule of the day, in order to give the client the unpacked beautiful apartment that they're expecting is making sure that we get to start, at the very beginning of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you end up losing 2 or 3 hours of that due to whatever, or not being packed enough, then everything is thrown off.
Right.
So yes, I mean, I that's something I would touch on too, that I think was a learning thing for me when I first started the business, that a lot of times clients just felt like with the family dynamics that they had, that this stressful situation would be better if experts handled it versus trying to get in there with mom and dad. Because, like you said, most of the time people have very, very good intentions, but they end up just being very task oriented. And really, what they're best at is being the support of mom and dad on that day.
Right.
So go to lunch with mom, take her to a movie, get her nails done, but just be there, because whether they're watching all of this or not, it's taking place. The change is taking place, and that's stressful. To have family involved in the packing and the unpacking and setting things up generally didn't work as well.
Right.
And, that it really is an individual decision. You have to look at your own family about how that would want to work. But I think you're right on target as far as picking a specific task rather than just having the overall support there. And
right.
And then everyone is upset.
Right. And stressed.
Yes, it actually protects the family relationships when we're the ones doing that work, and the family gets to really focus attention.
Agreed. I think that's really beautifully said. And, one thing that I think that sometimes, I try and set up before a move manager gets involved, and sometimes I get some pushback, and I always say, you're in charge here. This is your home, your move, your steps. But what I've seen be really successful, and I think this ties into what you were saying, is to go ahead and decide where you're moving, right? Know who your players are going to be, your move manager, your mover, your realtor, how the estate sale and all the other things are going to be handled. But I always suggest to go ahead and move first before the house goes on the market. And the reason for that is a lot of what you were saying about timing, because sometimes on average, a person may have 30 to 40 days from a contract to you have to be out. And that can feel really rushed, especially if you're dealing with all the transactional moving pieces of repairs and negotiations and all of that. And at least in Texas, it's really not until you're a week, almost 2 weeks into the contract before you know that you feel fairly confident that the buyer is going to stick around. So now we're talking about a 2-week time frame to sort and pack and move and get rid of everything else that's left behind. And so I really try and paint that picture with my clients of saying, you can do this the other way. You can stay in the house, wait for the contract, wait for the buyer and the closing date, and then start all of this process. But that's where I see my disasters on my end of someone trying to get out and trying to get contractors to, come in and do repairs and do all of the things, and also be making this huge transitional move. So that's something from my end that I see too, is just to go ahead and move so that you can take your time. You can, if there is a delay, there's something major going on, even with all this COVID-19 going on right now, I've had people who have been able to take their time and been able to move, and take all this time to move, even though now the estate sale's delayed. But I can tell you, if we already had a contract on the house, I don't know what would have happened, because estate sales aren't going on right now. So would all of this stuff have been shipped into pods and paid for storage, or just gotten rid of instead of sold? I don't know. But luckily, the vast majority of our clients do follow that pattern of moving out and then going ahead and having an estate sale and then putting the house on the market. So,
and just working with you, I just saw that work so much better. Mm-hmm. And, You are just looking at, what is the ideal way to move? What is going to be the easiest on me, the client?
Mm-hmm.
How should this take place? The best way to go about doing it is working with the move manager. Got all these things that are being planned and set up. You're picking your most cherished, belongings and the artwork that you love and
Right.
things like that. And then that gets taken and you are completely set up in your new home. And you never have to think about any of the rest of it. You have just moved out of that stressful environment with people who have helped you do that. And now you are set and ready to move on to this next season of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the other things, the things that are still in the home that need to be sold or dispersed, the repairs you're talking about and all of that is taking place. And you have other good people that are taking care of that. And that
Right.
is great. And, the older you are, the harder that is to deal with. And so it's a very much a blessing to go through the process in the way that you have just described.
And when, on all the moves that you and I did together, I think another thing that was really beneficial to our clients is that, because these are the type of moves you make and the type of clients that I work with, and then the estate sale piece of it too, there's so much communication between us as far as coordinating times and passing keys back and forth and alarm codes and all of that, that the client isn't getting 20 calls from me and then the same questions from you, and that's not all going on. And even arranging cleaning after the move and that kind of thing, you and I were always able to speak to each other. And that's one of the beauties of a move manager, is that this is so much more than packing and moving stuff. This is everything prior to the move, and then all of it that a lot of people don't think about after the move that needs to happen. So what kind of, so that you have a client, they've moved, you've set them up, everything is just beautifully arranged. They're able to, right out of the gate, start their new life and adjust at wherever their new home is. And now, well, let's just say there's a house that's still sitting with a whole bunch of stuff in it that they didn't take, that kids didn't take. So what happens now with all of that?
Well, I think there's the traditional ways that we know that leftover things need to be dispersed. The first, I guess, would be the estate sale or the online auction. And, the environment that we are in right now is that there is a lot of stuff in the marketplace, and there is not a lot of demand. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the difficult conversations that I have to have a lot of times, is the very things that the client probably spent the most on, a dining room suite with 8 or 10 chairs, the china cabinet, the crystal, the china, and then just regular household things. There's so many people that are downsizing right now that there is just a glut of items. And so an estate sale or an online auction can be a good way to disperse those things. You just need to have a very realistic understanding of the value of most of those things. And we always looked at it like if there was enough income generated to pay for the sale itself, for the labor to prepare it, because it's a lot of work, then that's success. Really, right. You're wanting to find a new home for these things with people that will love them. And really, that's what an estate sale is doing.
And I think what you're saying is absolutely one of the hardest things for people to hear, but it's so true and so real that, an estate sale fetching just thousands and thousands of dollars is just not a realistic picture, unfortunately. So, and like you said, I mean, you've taken the best of the best And then your children have taken some of the best of the rest, and now you're left with everything else. But I can say that I've had clients, for one reason or another, normally it's a time crunch, they've paid for a trash out, is what it's called. And that is heartbreaking, to see a dumpster pull up in the front yard and everything be put into that, and then to pay a few $1,000s for that to even happen.
That's a good point for you to make. And when people are thinking about this, or when they do an estate sale, they're very disappointed in the amount that comes in. That is, those objects that are in that house have to go somewhere.
Right.
And someone has to move them, whether that's your son-in-law or you, or someone that you pay. So those objects have to be moved somehow. And if you cannot have to pay for that, then that's a blessing, really.
Right.
And with the estate sale and the online auction, those items are going to people that are happy to have them.
Yes.
And that feels good. That's not throwing them away. That's giving them new life. And I hear that what they call brown furniture.
Right.
It was so popular in the antiques and all of that, is starting to have some resurgence, because our children are wanting to be recycling. They're wanting to give new life to things. And so that's good. They're seeing more value in that.
Right.
It's just even 5 years ago, they really weren't. So if you can keep your eyes focused on what the purpose of the online auction and the estate sale is, it is helping you be able to clear your home and give those things new life, then it's very successful. Donation is also a very good way to do that. You can take some of that off on your taxes for charities. And again, it's giving people work, it's giving things new life, and it's sometimes it's quicker, to do that.
Yes. And donation can be wonderful. The worst experience I ever had with someone that was on an absolute time crunch and had a dumpster pull up was the husband went back to the house during the clear out and saw his violin in the dumpster. And it was heartbreaking. And it was decisions that his adult children made with good intentions of getting the house cleared out. It was a very valuable home, and they had really taken so much out of that house. It wasn't a huge house already, but for him to have seen that, I can't imagine what that did over the next few weeks or months or even years to have seen that. But if it had been donated or sold, even if it was sold for $10, it would have meant so much more to him, and he wouldn't have had that heartbreak. And I've had really great stories about estate sales and someone knowing that something that their children didn't want. There was one time a letter jackets, right? And those adult sons didn't want those letter jackets. So, we don't want them, Mom. We do not want our old leather jackets. And she wasn't going to move them. She didn't have space for those. And the estate sale was going on. She called the estate sale person and said, I've had a change of heart. I want to have those letter jackets. I need to keep those even though my sons don't want them. And she said, I'm so sorry, but somebody came and bought those. He graduated from that high school, and the high school doesn't exist in San Antonio anymore. And he wanted those. And she started crying, and they said, I'm so sorry. Maybe we can figure out who bought. And she said, no. My sons would have thrown them away. I'm so glad that someone has those that wants those. So,
yes, you go through quite a bit of a learning curve when you start downsizing, and things that you felt like would have a lot of financial value. You find that it isn't so much the financial value that gives something worth. It's often the memories that those things are connected to. And so if you can find someone who values it, like I had a client who had, oh my goodness, 150 sets of cup and saucers because she collected them all over the world. And she couldn't take 150 with her to the senior community.
Right.
But we did pick 20, still quite a lot, of her favorites, and there was a window in her apartment
Mm-hmm.
that had a ledge, and we were able to put all of those on that ledge. And what a wonderful memory marker was for her, that she didn't need 150 of them to do that for her.
Right.
And then those other teacups were passed on to people who absolutely were thrilled to have them.
Right.
So if you can find a way to keep the memory, but not necessarily all of the stuff that is tied to that, then you are very much freed up. You know, there's a lot of books written on the freedom that getting rid of a lot of possessions brings, and I found that to be very true.
Right.
For my clients and for myself as well. So it kind of breaks that bond that you feel with stuff.
Right.
And just being able to connect that with good memories, and like that gentleman being able to have that letter jacket that he never found to get. What a blessing. And so you can let things go if you feel like that there's going to be use of them.
Right. Right. And that helps, I think, sometimes take some of the guilt away, because I've seen people who can't let go of something that's been passed down through the generations, but it simply is too large and it's not going to make the move. So that can help eliminate some of that guilt too, to know that it's going to somebody that's excited to have it. And I know you've seen that too, where people are excited. So.
And I would share that with my clients too, because what would you rather have? Would you rather have your daughter take your china that she's going to stick it in the back of her closet and it's never going to see the light of day, but she doesn't want to hurt your feelings, or to sell it to a collector who has been looking for those pieces to match what her grandmother did? Right. I mean, the difference is huge. I mean, you want your children to love what you love, but these next generations are viewing things very differently than our generation or our parents' generation. And that has to be okay. You know, right. There's sentimental things like jewelry that isn't as hard to pass down, but it needs to be okay that they don't have the same attachment to it.
Right. And hopefully that helps. And I think a move manager can come into, if there's a listener listening, and really talk to them about their specifics. The teacups or something, specific. A giant piano is something specific. And so that's part of, I think, what you're saying, of reaching out early so that those teacups could start to be sorted months in advance, that kind of thing.
And I just do want to touch on, because some people do have things like a gun collection, or a coin collection, or high-end art. Now, those things will have an audience that often an auctioneer in a different town or state can provide. And if it has significant value, or there's a possibility of it, then we would absolutely want to get an appraisal of that, just to make sure.
Right.
That doesn't mean there aren't things that have value that could be sold. But it might need to go through a different avenue than an estate sale. And a move manager has those resources to be able to reach out and find. I mentioned that couple that made such a good move. Well, they collected art from a particular artist from New Mexico, and they didn't have room for all of it. And we talked about doing, including it in the online auction, but most people here would not recognize that artist.
Right.
There was a gallery in New Mexico who did. And so they were able to get that art to them, and it was sold to someone who really appreciated it. And they also got the money for it that it should have. So
I think that's
have the experience to be able to look at those things and help you with that.
Right. And sometimes the online sales can be interesting, because you can reach a broader group. And even though, so I agree with that. And it's all just so specific, and different people have different valuables. There's a family I'm talking to now that has an incredible Coca-Cola collection. And so that's something that has to be treated a little bit differently. And so we're working through that right now too. But I think, are there any other really great tips or anything else that you think that people should know you know.
Well, we had talked about a timeline. I think if, like we said, the sooner you can start, the easier it will be on you. But if you only have 8 weeks, that's enough time generally to go through this. Something we didn't talk about earlier, it's the scheduling,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the months from say May to September. Movers are booked up sometimes for months in
Right.
advance. And so that's not something you would want to wait on. Um, Even if you end up having to adjust the date that you are on their books. So the movers have a schedule, move managers have a schedule, estate sale providers have a schedule, and the community has a schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it isn't just one schedule that you're trying to adjust to. There's a lot of moving pieces to that. So really, the earlier you can reach out to start trying to make these connections and make these decisions, the better off you are. But
Right.
after you've worked 6 to 8 weeks out for the downsizing and preparations, and then letting your
And then it's not back to back days of sorting. It can be spaced out some more.
right, and you really, it's a very tiring thing. The most we would ever work is 4 hours at a time because it's just so stressful. The emotional decisions that you're having to make. And there were some clients that we would do twice in a week, but often it was just once a week that we did
Right.
that because it was too much. So you just want to give yourself that space. And if you
Right.
can, why wouldn't you? I guess if we are going to be wrapping up, there's three things that I would really like to leave you with
Okay.
after the things that we talked about. Um, And I guess the most important thing is to just plan and prepare as much as you possibly can, and let yourself have the help that you need. We talked about this being a very different move than you had before, and um, so many of our clients were just beyond delighted when they
Yeah.
walked into their new home
Right.
because they really didn't know what to expect. They had never had that level of support before.
Right.
So it's hard to describe that, but I've had many people say it was worth every penny that they
Right.
paid and more, and that the cost really is dependent on the amount of time. How much time is it going to take? If you're a quick decision maker and there isn't a lot of accumulation, it's not going to be that much. If it takes a long time for you to make decisions, or there's a lot of things that need to be gone through, then that's going to add some expense. But
Right.
still, on the average, most people who used all of our services, and sometimes even including the move, it was less than 1 month rent
Yeah.
from the community, which when you compare all that you are getting and all that you're relieving yourself of, um, that's not very much.
I agree. I mean, just to have a successful move, I mean, it's just absolutely valuable. People will ask, well, is it worth it? And I will say, absolutely. I mean, this is, you know, most of our business is from repeat clients, personal referrals, which I'm sure yours is as well. And people wouldn't do that if they had regretted using the services. So,
Absolutely. Um, the second thing that I would leave you with, and she didn't ask me to say this, but my personal experience with Jennifer and her team just made this process go so much better. Her main focus is on senior adults and their specific needs. And I've just not seen anyone who was as caring as her and had the level of excellence as far as the services she provides. So I saw that time and time again with the process that we used, and we worked together. And then when it came time for us to move, which came about very quickly,
yeah.
I didn't have a lot of time to plan for my own self, but I had just seen Jennifer working that where we hired her to sell our home in San Antonio, and it worked exactly the same.
Well, I really appreciate that, Karen.
I really like the process that you have as far as how you determine pricing, and then just the things that you feel need to be done to the home, which is not an overabundance, but it's exactly what's needed. And then the home sells in a really good amount of time because you've done that.
Well,
So
thank
I
you.
would just say, at least sit down and talk with her. This is someone who really has a lot of experience, and she really cares on top of that, which matters a lot. The last thing would be just most people wait too long to
Right.
put off this decision, and then they are moving in crisis. And that is not something that you want for yourself. That's not something you want for your parent. And it is never easy to move. We're not saying that.
Yeah.
We're saying that having the help and the preparation that we're talking about today can make the difference between being one of the better days you've had
Right.
with a move and one of the worst days that you will always remember.
Yes.
So I would just encourage you to start now in going through things, and go ahead and make that decision, go ahead and make that move and get started. Like I said, my dear client telling me, she said, if we had just known, and she wasn't the only one, that our life would be as good as it is now, we would have done this 5 years
Yes.
ago. So you don't want to lose that time. You want to be able to enjoy it, and you have good people here that are going to support you through that change.
Yes, I think that's just such a great message to say. And I think that all the information you provided hopefully makes some of our listeners understand that this is something they can do with the right players in place. They have the strength and ability to do it, but to start sooner rather than later, proactive versus reactive. So well, thank you so much, Karen, for being here today. And I'm sure if any of our listeners have questions, you'd be willing to take some emails or whatever that would be to help. Mm-hmm.
We are not supporting or serving the San Antonio area any longer, but there are several move managers there that are absolutely large enough to provide what you need. The downsizing services are a little bit hard to find, but then there are organizers who can help with that as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or point you in the right direction. And I just wish you all the best.
Well, thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, Karen.